On September 10, 2025, Charlie Kirk, a young conservative activist and close ally of former President Donald Trump, was assassinated while speaking at Utah Valley University. The incident shocked America, but it wasn't just some isolated tragedy. Kirk's death is part of a longer chain of political violence that has been building for years, showing us how deeply this trend has taken root in American politics. As one observer put it, to understand violence, you don't just count the incidents, you have to ask why it happens and who benefits from the chaos. And when we look back, we can see the pattern clearly. The Capitol riot in 2021, the attack on Speaker Pelosi's home in 2022, the wave of threats against lawmakers in 2023 and 2024, and now the assassination of Kirk in 2025. Step by step, violence is no longer an exception. It's starting to look like a new political language. The death of Charlie Kirk isn't something we can look at in isolation. It's the final step in a pattern that's been building for nearly 5 years, where violence has slowly shifted from being rare to becoming, in a way, the language of politics. Think back. January 6, 2021, the Capitol riot. Thousands stormed the Capitol to stop Congress from certifying the election. It was the biggest act of collective political violence in modern times. Then, October 28, 2022, the attack on Paul Pelosi. An extremist broke into the speaker's home and nearly killed her husband with a hammer. That was violence targeting leaders directly, up close and personal. In 2023 and 2024, we saw a flood of threats against lawmakers, over 9,000 in just 1 year. Not only messages and letters, but also swatting, where armed police would raid a politician's house because of fake reports. Violence wasn't just in the streets anymore, it was seeping into their daily lives. On July 13, 2024, former President Donald Trump survived an assassination attempt in broad daylight during a rally. A gunman opened fire as cameras rolled. That was a whole new level of boldness. And finally, September 10, 2025, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a young politician, gunned down in public. That was the breaking point, showing us how far things have come. Step by step, violence moved, from collective action to personal targeting, into the everyday lives of lawmakers, then to national leaders, and finally to the younger generation stepping up in politics. Each time, it shocked us less, and each time, it felt more like this is just part of American political life now. On the surface, the causes seem obvious. First and foremost is extreme political polarization. When 1 out of every 5 citizens says they're open to using violence, we can't call it a rare accident anymore. People no longer see the other side as opponents to debate, but as enemies to eliminate. And here's the irony. The very country that once promoted democracy as a global model is now debating whether beatings and assassinations should be treated as legitimate political tools. Then there's social media, the amplifier of outrage. These platforms reward engagement, so the more extreme, the more shocking your words, the more likely they go viral. What used to be fringe calls for violence are now part of everyone's daily newsfeed. A bitter paradox. Not only is violent rhetoric not blocked, it's algorithmically boosted. And let's talk about the language used by elites. When politicians shout, "We must fight," the crowd often takes it literally. Instead of lowering the temperature, words from those at the top pour fuel on the fire. And of course, after an actual gunman shows up, everyone acts surprised. But beneath these sparks are deeper roots. Trust in institutions is collapsing. Barely 22% of Americans believe the federal government does the right thing most of the time. That means almost 8 in 10 see Washington as nothing more than static noise. On or off, it makes no difference. When the channels of democracy no longer carry meaning, violence starts to look like the reasonable alternative. And democracy itself is eroding. VDEM still labels the US the world's largest liberal democracy, but nearly all its indicators are sliding. It's a surreal picture, a country that calls itself the fortress of democracy, while its citizens question whether their votes still matter. And when people distrust the rules, they want to write new ones. Violence becomes the fastest pen. Meanwhile, a constant spiral of threats sets the stage. over 9,000 threats against lawmakers were recorded in 2024. Add swatting, anonymous letters, and streams of harassment, and American politics now looks less like governance and more like a cheap reality show. Drama every day, except here the drama comes with armed police and bulletproof vests. And once people get used to that, the next step, real violence, doesn't feel shocking anymore. Think about the paradox. This is a nation that once sent troops abroad to spread democracy, yet it now lives with levels of political insecurity rivaling the very regions it used to call unstable. From Baghdad to Kabul, America once argued that violence was the symptom of democratic failure. But when Washington, D.C. is lined with barricades, when lawmakers live under daily threat, and when presidential candidates become sniper targets, this is nothing less than America's own version of the chaos it used to diagnose abroad. In other words, the shadow of instability that America once pointed to at its borders has now fallen on the very heart of the so-called beacon of democracy. So the pattern is clear. Immediate sparks, yes, but underneath them, a pile of dry kindling built up over years. Put them together, and the fire was never a sudden disaster. It was inevitable. And the ultimate irony is this: the very system designed to contain violence now seems to be normalizing it instead. In an ideal political system, violence is a disaster. It takes lives, it shatters trust, it weakens institutions. But in today's America, chaos has become a resource, something that certain players actively exploit. First, extremist politicians. Every act of violence gets turned into a tool to rally their base. Take the 2021 Capitol riot. One side called it patriotic resistance, the other called it domestic terrorism. Either way, each camp used it to fuel their own narrative. This creates what you might call a uniting of fear. The more violence, the easier it is to lock in your supporters, raise money, and secure votes. Strangely enough, the wounds of democracy have become campaign slogans. Second, the media and social platforms. With the logic of if it shocks, it sells, if it bleeds, it leads, news outlets and digital giants profit directly every time tensions erupt. Footage of crowds smashing Capitol doors or the security video of Paul Pelosi being attacked, these became viral content, circulating non-stop, generating ads, clicks, and views. In that model, violence stops being a tragedy. It becomes entertainment, another product to boost ratings like some twisted reality show. Third, extremist groups. For them, chaos is a golden opportunity to recruit and to legitimize violent ideals. A threat against a lawmaker is spun as proof that the system is rotten. An assassination turns the victim into a martyr, a banner to march under. Violence, once unleashed, is recycled into fresh energy for the next act of violence. Put these mechanisms together and you see the cycle. Violence erupts, the media amplifies it, engagement skyrockets, politicians mobilize their base, extremists use it to recruit. The result? Instead of being extinguished, violence is stimulated, kept alive within a vortex of interests. So here's the paradox. Chaos is not a loss for everyone. For some, it's profitable. For some, it's power. The more unstable the politics, the richer the harvest for those who know how to exploit instability. And that may be the greatest irony of all. The death of Charlie Kirk not only ended a young life, it exposed a dark turning point in American political history. When violence crosses the line from being an isolated event to becoming a new political language, the question is no longer why it happens, but whether democracy still has the strength to restore faith in itself, or whether it will be forced to live with violence as the new normal. In this moment of grief, what matters first is offering sincere condolences to his family, his loved ones, and to all those who trusted and stood alongside Charlie Kirk. Agree with him or disagree with him, one truth remains: human life should never be treated as a bargaining chip in politics. History will debate the path American democracy chooses after this trauma, but for now, the world can only watch and ask itself, has the shining beacon that was once praised so brightly dimmed to nothing more than a flickering light in the storm?
The truth is singular, but its interpretations are countless.